I have too much ambition to rest in the unnoticed middle order of mankind. Since neither birth nor fortune have favored me, my actions shall speak to the world.
Matthew Flinders lived not very far away in a place called Henrietta. Whilst he was in Mauritius, Matthew Flinders drew the very famous map of Australia.
The publication in 1814 of a voyage commenced in 1801 requires some explanation. Shipwreck and a long imprisonment prevented my arrival in England until the latter end of 1810.
In danger of sinking in the middle of the Indian Ocean, he sought shelter in Mauritius. Unaware, England was now back at war with France. There, he was arrested as a spy and was to be held for 6.5 long years.
Flinders attempts to explain the reasons behind his decisions to stop at Mauritius, contrary to his written orders and conditions of his passport issued by the French consul in Paris, as written in his third log.
I was desirous to see in what state it had been left by the revolution.
This is my ancestor, Marie-Antoine, Baron du Nièville. He was employed as an important official person in the government, in charge of someone but without a title. He wasn't asked to go to Flinders. Flinders came to him. They met very quickly. There was an immediate connection that brought them together. Flinders became his close friend. It was he who unfortunately brought Flinders to Port Louis to meet the governor. The governor laid his arm on Flinders and took him to prison for many years. Arriving in Port Louis, Flinders learns of the death of Nicolas Baudin on the island some weeks earlier, and the departure of his ship, Le Géographe. Some of the officers spoke a bit of English, and they asked him about the colony at Port Jackson and Baudin's conduct there. They asked if he knew of the voyage of Monsieur Flinders, but failing to understand, he replied that he did not.
He asked, in an impetuous manner, why I came here in a small schooner with a passport for the investigator. We were taken to some place which we expected was to be a tavern, but it had the most prison-like appearance. I sought protection and assistance in your port, and I found a prison. It is indeed a most cruel suspense in which I am kept. I know not whether death is not almost preferable to it. Hitherto I have been treated as a spy. I should suppose that coming to a determination upon my fate, which implies to setting me at liberty, or on the one side, or of putting me to death on the other.
A surprisingly prolific period for Flinders, during which he was to produce his first charts of Terra Australis and complete 2 scientific theses that were smuggled out and presented to the Royal Society in London by his patron, Sir Joseph Banks. This led to his invention, the Flinders bar, positioned beneath a ship's binnacle, which remains a legal requirement on all ships under international maritime regulations to this day. It was also an intense period of socializing, as Matthew Flinders was indeed becoming a cause célèbre.
He was the catalyst for what I call the Mauritian hospitality. It was Peter who, in fact, to reduce Flinders' isolation, asked his friends, his family, to support Flinders.
I wrote a letter this morning to the Captain General praying to be released, to demand justice without offending the oppressor. So difficult it is to express what the heart does not feel. I've only admitted telling him what would be offensive. It is said that I ought to have set my oppressor at defiance altogether and not to have spared him.
Peter Company in Port Louis, of course, financed all the privateering of their cousin Robert Surcouf. They were associated with many shipments, transactions, captures of English goods, trading of the goods. And in fact, in one of the letters, Matthew Flinders is asking Tommy Peter, who has gone to then Ile Bourbon, to sell some goods that had arrived on one of the Peter ships. He's asking him, why are you taking so long? Why are you not coming back? Flinders is missing his friend.
Flinders spent 5 years at Le Refuge in the company of Madame d'Arifat and his 2 daughters and 2 sons.
Comparatively, with my situation on this island, the first 2 years I am now very happy. The family with whom I now reside are one of the most amiable on the island. I've become particularly attached to the eldest daughter, Delphine, who has strength of mind, a resolution and degree of penetration that very few men can boast of. Not to mention her activity, industry, desire for information and quest for knowledge.
Matthew Flinders was particularly interested in this site, living at the Darifats right next door to Toussaint de Chazal and his family, whom he met regularly and played music with Toussaint's wife. He used to come here regularly. As you go up to the top of the property of the estate, you come to a ridge at the edge, and from where you can see the whole sea in front of you, right up from almost Port-Louis to the north, to the south, the Mont Brabant mountain. All officers, obviously, of the Royal Navy, as all navies, have this very important responsibility, is to gather information, intelligence about all the places that he resides, so that he could then transmit that to the authorities. But certainly one of the reasons he came here is so that he could have an open view, and from the top over there, he could observe all the ships, all the maritime movements that were sailing up and down this coast, merchant vessels, but certainly military vessels, because the British, you know very well that they wanted to take Mauritius. It was a very important strategic position in Mauritius. From the Darifat's house, he had 11 miles radius around which he could travel, and this was part of this place. Certainly very good exercise, certainly very good fresh air, but certainly also very good intelligence, military intelligence, which he transmitted. So you will have the opportunity to walk here really and truly on the trail of Matthew Flinders.
In 1807, Napoleon ordered the release of Matthew.
The reasoning of the inhabitants upon this suspension was that having been so long on this island, I'd gained too much knowledge of it for my departure to be admitted with safety. But if it was so, the Captain General was punishing me for his own oversight, since without the detention forced by himself, the supposed dangerous knowledge could not have been acquired. What appeared to be granted as an indulgence was perhaps done with a view to this very pretext of my too extended knowledge of the island, a pretext to which could scarcely have been alleged as long as I remained shut up in prison.
Still in Mauritius here today, people raise Matthew Flinders with me almost on a daily basis.
It was an unjust incarceration that brought the career of a brilliant scientist to a premature end.
Never in any place or amongst any people have I seen more hospitality and attention to strangers, more sensibility to the misfortune of others of whatever nation than here, than I myself have experienced in Mauritius. After a captivity of 6 years, 5 months, and 27 days, I, at length, had the inexpressible pleasure of being out of the reach of General Ducon.
United,